So the social license to automate task of the user's TCP is investigating the social, cultural, economic, institutional, and regulatory dimensions of automation in programs designed to deliver demand-side flexibility, such as direct load control, virtual power plants. And these initiatives are seen to hold significant promise as a way to get around the challenges of achieving flexibility in traditional manual demand response programs. So where householders participating in manual demand response programs have reported experiencing the changes to their household practices associated with load shifting as inconvenient and disruptive, for example, it appears that there is some scope for automation to make load shifting and shaving effectively invisible to end users and to take over some of the planning and coordination that would otherwise be required of them. But automation comes with its own set of challenges, many of which are related to acceptance by end users in the residential sector. The automation of energy demand through, for example, the rollout of smart meters has been resisted by citizens in various parts of the world in ways not anticipated by system operators and policymakers. And this task was born out of a concern that the contestation around other renewable energy developments, such as wind farms, might extend to demand-side management. The concept of a social license, which originates in the mining industry, defined as an intangible, impermanent indicator of ongoing acceptance of a company's activities by communities. That's to quote one of the concepts theorists, Robert Bottiglier, is one way to think about this challenge. So in this task, we're examining the conditions for residential user acceptance, engagement, and trust in automation in order to make their energy demand more flexible, or what would be required to build and maintain that social license to automate demand-side flexibility. So this task was launched in October 2019 and will conclude in October this year. We have 7 participating countries: Australia, Austria, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland, and the US. And the collaboration brings together diverse perspectives from different disciplines. We have amongst our research partners representatives from human-computer interaction who are looking at how interfaces and the interaction of users with automation technologies shape outcomes. There's social practice theory, which is looking at how technology use is socially structured. Science and technology studies, looking at how society and technology shape each other. Economic and business studies, and policy and regulatory studies. So we're very much still in the midst of data collection and analysis at this stage. But today I'm just going to briefly outline some of our case studies from 2 of the participating countries with you and share some findings from these case studies. And this analysis that I'm going to share is based on science and technology studies, which is the field that I work in. And here we're going to underline in particular the significance of user needs, aspirations, and expectations in shaping project outcomes and whether flexibility can be achieved. So the first case study is of user perspectives on a virtual power plant, a proposed virtual power plant here in Australia. This was a study conducted with Solar Analytics, which is a solar monitoring service, GreenSync, several network operators, and with funding from the New South Wales Department of Planning, Industry and Environment. And the objective was to establish people's willingness to join a battery virtual power plant. And we conducted interviews and focus groups with several people in 4 Australian states, mostly on the eastern seaboard, but also some in Australia, South Australia, which is a state that's facing particular challenges around renewables integration because it just has so much of it. And some of the people we spoke to have solar systems on their roofs, some don't, some have solar monitoring systems, most do not have batteries, but were thinking about purchasing them. And we asked them about why they purchased or would be interested in purchasing a battery, as well as their understandings of what a virtual power plant is and the issues in the energy system that initiatives like VPPs may address. And I'm just going to draw out some of the key points here. There's much more detail available in the study report on the user's TCP website. So the reasons that participants are considering purchasing a battery include maximising self-consumption for environmental or financial reasons, energy independence and security of power supply. The main barriers are financial, that is the cost, the capital required, and the payback period. We found that there's very little understanding, interestingly, even among the relatively engaged cohort of participants with solar monitoring devices, about what a VPP is. But once the basic principles of VPP were explained to them, most expressed interest in learning more and would consider participating, but emphasised that they would need more information before making a decision. The reasons they gave us for wanting to participate were primarily economic, social, understood broadly, and environmental. So the financial reasons were that they perceived an opportunity to save money on their electricity bills and generate some income. And they emphasised often in our conversations that they wanted they wanted insurance that they were going to be adequately compensated for their participation. And then the social reasons were grid management, for example, voltage control. One person told us, I'm okay with allowing some level of control to make sure that things are not dangerous for me or others. They're interested in preventing blackouts, and this was particularly a relevant issue in that state of South Australia I mentioned, because they do frequently have blackouts, and reducing electricity costs for everyone. And then there are the environmental reasons, primarily to enable more renewable energy. And they consider this to be a way of having more clean energy generated for all. We found that some of our informants seem to be starting to think about virtual participation as the next logical step on their renewable energy journey, first from investing in a solar system on their roof, to then buying a battery, and then to join a virtual power plant. One person told us, I'm looking for something else to do now. I've put the solar system on the roof. Now what can I do? The main reservations that people had about participating in a virtual power plant were that they would lose control, typically related to a loss of access to the solar energy if their battery is participating in a virtual power plant event. This concern was particularly pronounced in those areas affected by blackouts. They were also concerned that they wouldn't benefit or may even be disadvantaged financially. So there was a concern that they might end up having to purchase electricity from the grid at prices higher than they were being compensated for discharging during a VPP event. And they were also worried that a VPP would serve others' interests and that they would be exploited. And here we saw a real reflection of a general kind of lack of trust in electricity retailers in Australia. So in the course of our focus groups and interviews, we showed the participants options representing different levels of participation in a VPP, which I'm showing you here. I won't go into the details, but the participants had a wide range of perspectives on all of these options. Most chose an option in the middle here, somewhere between, well, not participating in a virtual power plant at all and giving over sort of full control of their battery, as you'd expect. In particular, there was a considerable concern by many of them that they would that they retain a portion of the battery for their own household use. That was a common theme that came up. The research participants identified the following conditions for their participation as among the most important. So they tended to prefer, as I said, retaining part of the battery's capacity to meet their own needs. And this is more so the case for participants who purchased or are interested in purchasing a battery for primarily non-financial reasons. So those issues of independence, security of supply, maximising self-consumption. The option to opt out of participation, whether out of specific events or out of their contract altogether, was quite important too. And then time and time again, the participants were stressing to us that they want transparency, both before entering the program and often also during the program. So they want to be able to monitor exactly when and how their battery is participating. So from this analysis, we drew the following conclusions, among others, that virtual power plant participation does not actually align with the main motivations for investing in solar and batteries for most people. For people who have solar and who see themselves as being on a pathway towards greater self-consumption and independence from the grid, VPP participation would require quite a significant shift in their thinking. On the other hand, people without solar and batteries are more open to VPPs as a purely financial proposition, and it may be possible to engage them to invest in solar and battery for the purpose of VPP participation. Just move on to the next cases now, which are from one of our participating countries, Norway. And they concern electric vehicle charging in the context of rapid electrification of transport in Norway, which has resulted in new local demand for flexibility. These cases were conducted by our partners at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology Studies, Science and Technology, NTNU, within the Horizon 2020 projects ECHOES and INVADE. And these pilots that they looked at examined the rollout of smart electric vehicle chargers in single home garages and in shared garages in apartment buildings in Trondheim and Stavanger. As part of the INVADE pilot, detached homeowners expressed a variety of motivations for participation when they were given the option to acquire a state-of-the-art wall-mounted home EV charger from their network operator. These were offered via email newsletter, and the program was fully subscribed within half an hour. So there was quite considerable interest and enthusiasm for participating in the project. But subsequent research indicated that it wasn't just, oh, sorry, I don't know if I mentioned that the offer was for these chargers at half price. So a lot of people appeared to be interested in getting a discount on this quite sophisticated technology. But the subsequent research went on to find that there were other motivations at play beyond just that incentive for the discounted technology. And these included that the smart charger is faster and deemed more fire safe than charging from a normal outlet, which had attracted media attention around a number of house fires associated with overheating cabling. Many of the participants were aware of this safety issue and the recommendation from the Norwegian Civil Protection and Emergency Directorate to use a dedicated charger, but had not yet invested in that costly technology. So that was one of the reasons that they were interested in participating in this pilot. And these participant interviews suggested that an emerging norm of charging in what is considered a fire-safe manner, and one that doesn't actually appear to exist, at least not yet in other parts of the world, can be seen here in Norway. Another reason for their interest was an interest in technology and fun. And so one participant said, "I like to control the thing myself. I think it's fun to optimize things." Even though sometimes the consequences of the smart so even though they have this interest in exploring how to make their charging fun and to exploring how they can optimize it, their main interest was not their main interest was not in grid optimization. That was more coincidental to this interest in just having some fun playing with the charging infrastructure. And this connects to an aspect of the identity of the EV owner. Another reason was more practical and economic, and a motivation for installing smart home technology here is that smart chargers allow people to charge in off-peak periods when the electricity is cheaper. So here it wasn't that it would offer fun. It was that it was a means, a tool to optimize electricity consumption. And then finally, another reason that came up was comfort and battery maintenance. And the reasoning here was that charging overnight during winter was considered good for battery health and life expectancy, with the additional benefit for the comfort of the driver that the car would be already warm in the morning, on a winter morning. So the idea here is that charging during the night can provide that additional comfort, but can also be a motivation for load shifting. And so all of these factors, it seems, would need to be taken into account in designing programs to access demand flexibility for EV charging. For example, the person who signs up to a pilot out of a sense of fun needs to have a way to engage and exercise some agency. So some managed charging programs that take that control out of their hands may not be appropriate. But on the other hand, such a program may suit the practical EV owner who wishes to optimize their charging, but is less or not interested in actively engaging to make this happen. And the person who appreciates the warmth of a freshly charged car on a winter morning is going to be more open to a program that provides that overnight charging. Our NTNU colleagues also looked at charging in shared garages. And this introduced a whole nother layer of issues because it was a question of, it was a collective decision to install EV charging, and it was often prompted out of a sense of necessity that not all cars could have their own private chargers installed in these garages. It needed to be carefully managed to not place too much pressure on the existing infrastructure. So this raised the additional issues, and it shone some interesting light on the interactions that were required between all of the people in the building who were sort of represented by housing boards to negotiate how to proceed on this question of smart charging. So our colleagues have developed this framework to show how demand for EV smart charging emerges from specific social dynamics and contexts that are characterized by different levels of need and interest. And that shapes the engagement of apartment building managers and residents on this issue. So they developed a bit of a typology of different kinds of users, or how we can understand how different users would emerge in these contexts of choosing whether to invest in smart charging or not. And the first ideal type here is the practical end user who is faced with a high need for smart charging, high interest as well. And an example here is a quote from one board member who said that we have 60 EV owners on a waiting list. The EVs have come to stay in the charging system. The time consists in many different solutions. So it was time for a comprehensive solution. So they opted for smart charging with load control that we can live with for many years to come. The next ideal type is a playful one. So here the need is not so pressing, but the interest is high. And one said, it is when you get loose and try things and do things that you find interesting solutions. Similarly, from another board leader, the EV charging became very chaotic. So we said, listen here, we'll do this together. And then we tried to come up with a common solution for the garage. The next one is the unintended flexible end user, where there's a high need but low interest. And this is this is where people opt for automation technology out of practicality and perhaps a little reluctance. So one board member said it was the other option that the electrician suggested, that we should install some system that monitors power distribution. Exactly the details about that I simply do not know. But if it's not regulated, then it becomes pure spaghetti, becomes completely hopeless. So they turned to the shared smart charging. And then finally, the inflexible end user who is faced with low need and low interest. So comes to this very, very reluctantly. And one apartment building resident said, why is it urgent to expand the charging infrastructure now? Who knows if we need it so much capacity, because you don't know how to utilize or distribute the power smarter in the future when it hasn't even been invented yet. So this framework is allowing our NTNU colleagues to explore how the influx of EVs and a need for solutions to grid and charging challenges has resulted in a new form of what they call electricity grid sensitivity amongst a new group of citizen actors. Grid sensitivity refers to how the grid can become an object of concern, which opens for new practical and political engagement, such as what we're seeing by these practical and unintended flexible energy users among the Housing Board representatives. The different forms of engagement or non-engagement by these ideal type users also connect to wider salient questions and controversies around flexibility issues and acceptability of automation in this area. For example, about the extent to which we want everyday life to become dominated by automation technologies, which is one of the concerns raised by these inflexible end users. So I'll turn now to some emerging insights from these and other case studies. These case studies illustrate how automation technologies such as batteries, chargers, and home energy management systems don't just sit invisible in the background. They carry particular meanings for different people, and they can acquire new meanings in the contexts in which they're placed. Further, in contrast to how they are normally imagined, these technologies can, but do not straightforwardly or necessarily, relieve people of labour, as we typically imagine automation technologies to do. Instead, they necessitate and generate new kinds of individual and collective engagement, whether it's learning, interacting with others, monitoring, programming. These case studies show that people who might appear to be most open to providing demand flexibility through automation technologies cannot be assumed to be, such as the solar and battery owners in the VPP study who are reluctant to participate in a VPP. But equally, people who may appear closed to providing demand flexibility, for example, those apartment building residents and board members with initially low levels of personal interest in the technology itself, may become engaged. In that case, it was to support smart charging because it was perceived as a necessary solution to the challenge of ensuring safe and equitable access to charging in a shared garage setting. In the VPP case study, people became more interested when we discussed with them the wider benefits of a VPP. And this suggests that one way forward may be to promote a wider understanding of the challenges our energy systems as shared infrastructures are facing, and of the vital role that end users can play in achieving the flexibility in these systems that we need. And finally, these case studies show that a social license is something to be made, that is to be crafted by connecting flexibility to people's existing needs, aspirations, and expectations. And this is something that people are already influencing through their investments in DER that they're choosing to make. So the social license is not something to be imposed, but it's something to be made together with end users. I'll finish there. Thank you very much.